Three Wonders is a Capcom arcade game released in 1991. Like the Frankenstein's monster of arcade cabinets in the 90s, it combined three separate games into one machine. Midnight Wanderers, a run-and-gun shooter with similarities to the Ghost and Goblins games. Chariot, a horizontal scrolling spaceship shooter. And Don't Pull, a cutesy overhead action puzzle game where you push blocks around to destroy enemies before they get you. I don't think it was a very common machine in the arcades because most gamers I know have never heard of it. I heard about it on a gaming video on YouTube, and because I love Capcom so much I had to play it. And I'm glad I did, but it isn't replacing any of my other favorite arcade games. It was passably entertaining at least. In Midnight Wanderers, you play as Lu or Siva as they fight the Earth god Gaia, who has turned against the people. You move from left to right, jump, hang from ledges, and shoot in all directions. Along the way you open treasure chests by shooting them to gain power-ups and different weapons. If you get hit, you lose your armor, and if you get hit again, you die. But some chests contain a magic lamp that returns your clothes to you, which is good, because no one should have to run through the forest fighting for their life in their boxer shorts. But if all this sounds familiar, it is. Like a mixture of Contra and Ghouls and Ghosts. Midnight Riders is a fun game, my favorite of the three. But because it borrows so much from other existing formulas, it kind of lacks any identity of its own. I mean, Capcom didn't think it was good enough to highlight a release by itself. And that speaks of the ultimately pedestrian, if not enjoyable shooter. It's also a little short, and kind of easy by Capcom standards. But I'm not dissing it as much as it seems. It's fun. More so, I imagine, with two players. The graphics are very nice, and tons of enemies and projectiles on the screen, and the controls are spot on. But it just didn't grab me like other Capcom games from the same era did. Chariot actually stars the same two characters, as they have now been awarded magical gliders after beating Gaia. It recycles many of the same enemies, but now they are flying, and have different attacks and patterns. It has some interesting mechanics as a shooter. You collect different weapons and options. These options tell behind your character and can be fired out in a much bigger attack than your regular weapon. They refill pretty quickly, and to do the most damage, you should definitely use them a lot. You also acquire bombs that fire down to the ground, and occasionally an armor upgrade that allows you to absorb an extra hit. So, once again you have lots of familiar elements from the genre all cobbled together, and the end result is a good, but not great, shooter. Like Midnight Wanderers, it's a little short, and a little easy too. Regardless, the graphics are still nice, and the controls as refined as you would expect from a Capcom game. The third game, Don't Pull, has no connection whatsoever to the previous two. You play a little bunny rabbit and you push blocks around. Blobs and dragons either chase you around or wander around aimlessly, and you need to push blocks to crush them. If you push together 3 star blocks, it triggers a dance party where the enemies ignore you and, yes, dance. There are bomb blocks and fruit to pick up. Once the time runs out, all the enemies will run to escape the stage. But you still advance to the next stage, just with less points. Once again, you have a game that borrows a lot from various titles, but it lacks its own identity. It's okay for what it is, but I only played it a little bit because it's not my type of game. After 5 stages, it hadn't really evolved much except that there were more enemies to avoid. Graphics are good, control is good. If you like this type of game, you might enjoy it. But it's definitely out of place next to the other 2 action games. If I was Capcom, I would have entwined the first 2 games together with alternating stages. Since they are so similar, I think they would have fit good together. Padded out the overall game time, and provided a nice variety between stages. Instead of picking up power-ups in chests, I would have added a shop like Forgotten Worlds, and put the puzzle game in it as a game within a game. You could play at the shop for a chance to gamble for more power-ups and currency. You already pick up currency in the first 2 games, but it's just there to add to your score. Had all 3 games been combined into one, it might have had more of an identity and continued as a franchise. But I'm probably just nitpicking because all the elements are there as it is. Maybe it wouldn't have made a difference. I know that Midnight Wanderers would have made a cooler name than 3 Wonders if they had combined them all. Overall, it's a fun, if not forgettable experience. You can see everything there is to see with a few dollars worth of continues, and I don't think most gamers would have the desire to return to it much. But there were so many better games in the arcade back then, and plenty of superior Capcom games. If you're a Capcom fan, definitely check it out. If nothing else, then just to experience it. It's a good little time waster with mindless action. Just don't expect to experience anything from the 3 games you haven't seen dozens of times before. But there's nothing really wrong with the game, aside from that fact. Final score, 70. Fun, but forgettable.